Faith, family, inclusion. Today, we're diving right into a fascinating high-stakes collision. What actually happens when deeply held traditional religious beliefs meet the unconditional love for a child? It's a tension that's playing out in living rooms all across the world right now, and in this explainer, we're going to examine it through one deeply personal story, backed up by some incredibly revealing data. So what happens when a conservative, evangelical pastor's son comes out as gay? Well, to figure that out, we're going to look at the life of Bill White. Bill was a pastor whose entire world shifted when his son came out to him in 2015. You see, Bill was deeply entrenched in the traditional evangelical world. He grew up in it, he pastored in it, and he held a very conservative theology regarding LGBTQ+ individuals. He even named his son after his own gay brother, literally praying for years that his son would not be gay. But when his son finally sat him down to share his truth, Bill's abstract theological worldview suddenly became a very real, very personal reality.
Bill was instantly hit with this devastating realization. The theology he'd been preaching inherently excluded the very son he loved more than anything. He realized, in his own words, that when you're confronted with an entire people group that you've excluded, and you suddenly realize, this is me, these are my people, it changes everything. It completely wrecked him. But, as he notes in the source material, it also became one of the absolute greatest gifts he was ever given, because it forced him to truly, honestly evaluate his beliefs. It was a total clash of worlds. On one hand, you had Bill thriving in what he called the standard white guy megachurch model, focused on leadership, counting attendance numbers to make sure they were bigger than last week, passing the offering plate, but colliding head-on with that professional structure was his new reality as a father. He had a beloved son whose very existence challenged that entire system. He was terrified of losing his faith, losing his church, and losing his community. But hey, before we see exactly how Bill navigated this terrifying crossroads, we really have to look at the research. We need to understand the stakes here, because this wasn't just some abstract theological debate for a Tuesday afternoon. It was a literal matter of health and safety for LGBTQ+ youth. Get this, 8.4 times. According to data from the Trevor Project, LGBT youth who come from highly rejecting families are a staggering 8.4 times more likely to have attempted suicide compared to their peers who reported no or low levels of family rejection. They're also almost 3 times as likely to seriously contemplate suicide. The stakes of how a parent reacts in these moments, they're literally life and death. And a massive study by Miller and colleagues using the LGBTQ National Teen Survey completely backs this up. They looked at over 9,000 youth and found something absolutely fascinating. While a youth's religious affiliation strongly correlated with higher depression scores, which makes sense, given the conflict between their identity and their community's teachings, family acceptance acted as this massive, universal protective factor. It strongly decreased depressive scores across the board. So, regardless of a family's specific faith background, parental acceptance is the ultimate shield for a child's mental health. So, armed with the intuitive knowledge of these high stakes, knowing his son desperately needed his love and support, Pastor Bill White entered a really profound season of just arguing with God. He'd seen friends go through conversion therapy and fail. He'd seen friends walk away from their faith entirely. So, instead of letting his son walk away from the faith he loved, Bill went toe-to-toe with Jesus in prayer. He screamed, he cried, and he absolutely refused to let go of his kid. Just let the immense weight of this choice sink in for a second. He essentially told God, if you send me to hell for loving well, then okay. Then you're not the kind of God I want to follow anyway. It's just this raw, incredibly vulnerable admission of a parent prioritizing the safety of their child over a rigid adherence to religious norms. He decided that unconditional love was worth risking literally everything he had ever been taught about eternity. Now, to navigate this internal crisis, Bill had to figure out what to do with his Bible. He was terrified of losing the scriptures he loved and taught from every single day. So he began looking outside the theologians he'd studied in seminary. He turned to frameworks like womanist theology, specifically Dr. Weil de Goffney's womanist midrash, and mujeridista theology. These are frameworks that read biblical texts through the perspective of marginalized voices, and they allowed him to see the scriptures in entirely new ways, uncovering these incredible new depths of compassion. And this led to a massive theological breakthrough. He realized he wasn't losing the Bible at all. Actually, scratch that, it was more like he was just losing his lens. He was taking off a cultural pair of glasses that had been constructed by those in power, and he was putting on a new pair, one that let him read the text through a lens of grace and relationship and inclusion. He wasn't discarding his faith, he felt like he was finally getting it back.
But this transformation didn't just happen quietly in Bill's study. It fundamentally altered his entire church community. At City Church Long Beach, they formed a study team of progressives, conservatives, and folks right in the middle. They spent an intense 18 months reading, studying Greek words, and having really, really hard conversations together.
165 down to 55. As you can probably guess, this was an incredibly difficult process. The congregation shrank by 2/3 as they navigated this. Bill actually joked about it later, saying, "A bad pastor can cut a church in half, but it takes a really terrible pastor to shrink it to 1/3. The tension was just too much for some, and many people left." But here's the crazy part. Losing those members was actually a huge victory for the community. Those remaining 55 members, they still held diverse, progressive, and conservative views, but they made a unanimous commitment to stay together. They realized that having a diversity of theology on this issue shouldn't be a litmus test for their faith. And by going through that pain, they built the muscle required for hard conversations. Because they survived that, they were able to start tackling other super complex issues like racial equity and systemic injustice with a totally newfound resilience. They basically learned how to hold tension, difference, and love all at the exact same time. When you look at the devastating scientific data of family rejection we reviewed, and then look at Pastor Bill's deeply personal journey, it all points to one absolutely crucial conclusion. Unconditional familial love and acceptance is universally protective. It bridges the gap between religious tradition and human thriving, giving youth the physical and spiritual safety they need to survive in a world that can be pretty hostile to them. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to ask yourself a question, one that pushes past the need to always be right. It's a principle straight from our source materials. Instead of asking what is right, ask, what does love require of me? Just like Pastor Bill chose relationship, grace, and his son over rigid certainty, this question challenges all of us to look at how we respond when our beliefs are tested by the actual human being sitting right in front of us. I want to leave you with a quick favor. If you know someone who would benefit from this story, a parent, a church leader, a friend, please forward this explainer to them right now. Because as we've clearly seen today through both the science and the lived experience, choosing love and acceptance over rejection truly, literally saves lives. Thanks for hanging out with me today, and keep asking those hard questions.